everyone. I'm excited to announce that our podcast episodes are now available on YouTube. And that's mostly thanks to Angie for uploading them all. And that was no easy task because I think there was over 70 of them.
Well, it wasn't an easy task, but I'm so glad they're all there for everyone to listen to. And while you're there, please remember to subscribe.
Yes, by all means, please remember to subscribe so we can see you there too. And what's up next for our YouTube channel?
Well, soon we'll be sharing some video content, so this should be really interesting.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Hi, everyone. Hope you've been having a wonderfully creative week. I'm Rod Jones, and we celebrate what people love to do creatively by giving them a voice so you can learn and be more motivated from their life's experiences.
And I'm Angie Jones. Welcome to Thought Road Podcast. We invite you to subscribe wherever you listen, and we focus on sharing with everyone how they can think, be, and live more creatively.
So why don't you tell us who our guest is today?
Okay, our guest today is Jason Thornberry, and he's a writer that overcame one very major obstacle in his creative journey in life.
He's really quite an inspiration, and he's a very, very talented writer. And I actually understand that he started writing at a very young age. Mm-hmm. So how about hearing your quote for today?
Okay, here's our quote for this episode. The challenge is the challenge when we learn to recognize the hidden opportunities when things don't go well. And that is by Rod Jones, artist.
It's by me?
It is by you. I was able to use a quote that you came up with, Rod, and I think it kind of fits this episode. Although I have to say for our guest today, he became a writer that he wanted to become through some pretty tough circumstances.
Yeah, and he'll be sharing that with us.
Yeah.
I know we're going to learn a lot about being creative, and especially as a writer.
Yeah.
Jason really has a lot to share with us. I'm really excited about having him as a guest.
Me too. I agree. So let's listen to what Jason Thornberry has to say.
Jason, welcome to the Thought Road Podcast. We always enjoy and learn so much from guests that are accomplished writers. Wouldn't you agree, Angie?
I do. And hi, Jason. So good to have you with us today. Really looking forward to having you share your life's journey in becoming a writer and poet.
Well, it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Well, before we start our interview, we always like to ask our guests what they had for breakfast. So what did you have this morning, Jason?
This morning, well, I think like most writers probably, maybe it's a stereotype, but I do tend to drink copious amounts of coffee. But this morning I had breakfast with my wife. It was really nice. We had eggs and biscuits with the spicy jelly that we get at Pike Place, and coffee, of course. And, we as indulgent as it sounds, we had mimosas as well, because she had done this event the day before, and she had some champagne that she picked up. We shared.
That sounds so lovely. You guys had such a great breakfast.
And a romantic breakfast.
I know, right?
Yes. Well, we're very, very, very close.
Oh,
that's so nice.
Yeah.
That's so great to hear.
So,
Jason, why don't you share with us where you're originally from and where you grew up?
Well, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in San Bernardino, which is, as you know, it's about 60 miles southeast of LA. Lived there till I was in my early 20s. Moved a lot. Tried to actually moved to London. I went to London for a while and tried to join a band. Didn't do a lot of homework before I got there as far as lodgings or how I'm going to find a drum kit. And so it was very short-lived, put it that way. I came back to the San Bernardino area, joined a band, and got really busy and moved around a lot. And then moved to San Francisco for a few months. Came back down, joined a different band, and ended up in Orange County, which is where I was for a long time until I met my wife and we moved to Seattle. which is where we've been basically since 2010.
So were you a drummer then in the band?
I was, yeah. I was a drummer. That was my original, I started out as a kid, writing it, just sort of by accident, joined a garage band with, my best friend, Steve. I was a terrible drummer, as I think they all beginning drummers are. I was particularly bad. But it was really fun. I was really hooked on playing in front of people, performing. I ended up, after high school, I had really no intention whatsoever of going to college. I really wanted to get out of school as soon as possible. What's the Springsteen line? I forget the line, but he references, learning more from a 3-minute record than he ever learned in school, or something like that.
We can relate.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
We relate to that.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a huge music person. I mean, I think I had an imaginary band when I was like 5. I'd play on the pillows on my bed to old Kiss records and Queen records. Alice Cooper and Steve Miller. Yeah. And
Steve Miller,
and stuff like that. Yeah. So I do that. And then, but I was a writer as well. I got into writing because of my grandmother.
I was going to ask you, do you have a favorite childhood memory?
Well, living in San Bernardino, it's the kind of place that I wanted to get away from. Whenever I could. And luckily my grandparents, when they retired, they moved from San Bernardino, they moved up to Newport, Oregon, which is about midway up on the coast. Beautiful place. They lived in a retirement community on a hill, on this hill overlooking the water. So from about age 7, I started going up there and spending most or all of my summers up there, and did that from age 7, most years until I was about 19. And so I got this really nice break from the hottest part of the year. San Bernardino can get in the triple digits easily.
Right, it can.
Yeah, and so I didn't want to be down on that. And Oregon's really beautiful. And I think that's part of what made me want to live in the Northwest. My wife lived here as a child as well in Washington. So my grandparents were just these wonderful people, really loving. They had a great relationship. They're very kind. They're funny. They're very silly people.
Perfect.
We had a little,
they sound like great grandparents.
Yeah, the perfect grandparents.
Yeah, they were. We had this. My grandpa was in radio back in the days before disc jockeys, and he was an announcer. So we made this little comedy group out, the 3 of us. We called it The Group, and we'd make these little sketches, these little impromptu, improvised sketches, and we'd record them on cassette. And I mean, no one heard them, only me, but we'd make these cassettes, and my grandmother, though, always had a book in her hand. She's always reading, and she was also always writing, working on this one novel for years and years and years, always working on the same novel. And I eventually began to emulate her. I wrote too, and I would find myself carrying a notepad and a pen everywhere with me. And that went on through elementary and middle school, and then high school. By high school, I decided that I wanted to be Stephen King because he was the big cheese, as they say. He was. Yeah, I loved his writing style. I didn't necessarily want to write horror. He does it very well. He could write anything, I think, because he's written other things. But he really inspired me to write, and so I was writing this really awful novel about this man who avenges the murder of his parents. And it was a really silly book. I'm glad it was all written in pencil and pen since, been thrown away. But, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be the next Stephen King. And then one day, like I said, I ended up in a garage band just by accident.
Yeah.
So, and that was that.
Well, I think it would be really helpful here if you share with us a little bit about your personal history regarding being a musician and some of the things that led to your journey in becoming a writer.
Well, I did both, really, because I sort of had forsaken writing for music, writing seriously, but I wrote even while I was in the band. I kept a journal, and that was sort of how I made sense of the world, was by writing about my feelings and sort of confronting things on the page. With music, because I studied jazz for about 6 years with a couple of different teachers and got really involved in that and found that it really changed my music, my playing. I didn't listen to jazz when I didn't, for the most part, listen to jazz. I listened to, like punk rock and, post-punk and, a lot of alternative music and stuff like that. But I was very open-minded and still am. I listen to classical and hip hop, and I love music. You can ask my wife. So music really informed my teens and 20s, and playing music certainly did, but it was sort of cut short, and that was where writing sort of filled the gap, and I realized that was what I was meant to do, was to write.
Well, you had quite a transition at that point, and that gave you the opportunity to really concentrate on your writing, it looks like.
Well, I did. It wasn't the usual, I guess, transition. I call it more of a life interruption, because I'd been in bands for 12 years. At a certain point, I thought doing something with music. I thought that things were moving in a very positive direction, and they were doing it kind of quickly. The last band I was in, we played to, I think, 6 people at a little club in San Diego. The 3 of us, we moved into a studio apartment in Costa Mesa, where I was living, and 3 people in one room and a cat. And it was
and a drum kit.
Oh, that's hard.
And the drums were actually either at a rehearsal studio or in a car most of the time. So yeah, thankfully our equipment didn't live with us, but we living together allowed us to concentrate on the band, and actually forced us to, because that's all there was to do. We lived, we didn't have TV. And thankfully, I grew up without TV. I lived in sort of unincorporated part of San Bernardino, where we didn't have TV. We didn't have cable, and this is back in the 80s, early 80s. So I kind of grew up without television and moved in with these 2, my best friends at the time, and all we did was either rehearse, or we would go along to venues and give out flyers for concerts we were about to do, and things moved really quickly. We eventually bought a tour van, put out a single on vinyl with a label in Ohio, and then we did an album with another small record label, and got ready to release the album. And we had been getting a lot of press because we were playing a lot in Orange County and LA. The night before the album came out, I was at a party and got jumped outside the party by 2 complete strangers. And I don't know if you know what curb stomping is, but it's really, it's all in the name. I mean, when someone stomps your head against the curb, that's what these guys did. And I woke up a few weeks later, and I was basically minimally conscious, is what they called it. I was in a coma for a while, and I was in the hospital for 4 months. And when I got out, music was just sort of a thing of the past for me. I couldn't play anymore. I wore 23 casts on my left arm. I had developed what's called contracture. I was injured on right side of my head, which affected the left hemisphere of the right hemisphere of my head. I was injured on. It affected the left side of my body, shut it down basically. So I couldn't walk and couldn't use my left arm. But luckily, thanks to my mother, I was able to overcome that, and wouldn't have been able to without her. So,
my goodness.
Bless her.
Thank God for your mom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
when I got out,
that's just like incredible. What a story.
No,
I mean, you obviously weren't doing anything and just was at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if you know how well you know Long Beach or LA County. It was in Long Beach, and Long Beach. Apparently, I don't know this from experience, but other than that, it has good and bad pockets. Apparently,
yes,
I was told. I have friends that live in Long Beach now, and we'd actually considered moving to Long Beach before this happened. The band had considered moving there. A lot of our friends live there. I was told that this housewarming party that my then girlfriend was having was in, I guess later on I found out that it was in a quote unquote rough spot. Now where I'd grown up, San Bernardino, that is majority rough spots.
Right.
That happened, and I went up in hospital for 2 months in a hospital in Long Beach, and then they moved me to a sort of rehabilitation hospital in Downey. And that's where I started to really get better. I couldn't talk before that. I was mute because of the injury. That's where they did a lot of really proactive treatment on me that made it so I could walk and talk and have a normal life. When I got out of the hospital after 4 months, I was in a wheelchair, but I went back to the hospital immediately 5 days a week for outpatient therapy for a year, actually. That's how I got out of the wheelchair. Went from wheelchair to a walker to a series of canes. And then just one day I'm there, and one of my physical therapists actually pulled the cane out of my hand. I was leaning on it. She pulled it away from me, and I was, whoa!
Oh my gosh!
Lost my balance. And she said, "Okay, you're done with that thing." And I followed my mother because she took me to my sessions. I followed her out to the parking lot to the car later on, and got in the car and got out of the car and walked in the house. My stepdad said, "Where's the cane?" I said, "Valerie took it away."
You didn't need it anymore. Okay. How cool.
Yeah. So,
and you replaced.
It kind of reminds me.
I was just going to say, and then ultimately you replaced that cane with pen and paper. Yeah,
I did. Well, actually, before that, when I first got out, I started writing again, and it just kind of came back. I wanted to write about the experience, about what happened. So I was writing in a wheelchair. I was at my mother's computer with one hand because I did my left hand was my cast. So I just type, and I wrote by 2010 actually, which was basically 11 years after it happened. By 2010, I had finished a memoir about my experience in music, trying to make a life in music, and do that as my career, and also about my childhood somewhat, and also largely about my injury and the immediate after effects of it. So, but the memoir is done. It's just been kind of sitting. I'd sent it off to a few places and got some rejection letters and just let it sit, and went back to school. I like I said, I left high school with no intention of going back to school. So when I moved to Seattle, that's what I did. I went back and got my AA, and then I got my BA, and then I moved back to California and did my master's in creative writing. And we came back to Seattle afterward. And
well, if you're not getting rejection letters, notices, then you're just not trying hard enough.
Well, that's what I say to everybody. I mean, I'm part of the writing community on Twitter, and I understand it. I totally understand it. People, get sort of demoralized by rejection letters, and I tell them, because I submit on a daily basis to various magazines. I just got actually an acceptance this morning from a magazine for an essay I wrote. And actually, it's funny.
Fantastic.
Ironically, the essay is about getting rejected. That's what the essay is about. It's called Errant Crumbs, and it's about sort of pushing on even though you get rejections. That's what it makes you stronger, and it makes, rejections make acceptance sweeter.
Oh, that's a nice line.
That's a very nice line.
Yeah.
And so true, though.
So it's true. It's totally true. And I've, I mean, one of our first assignments in grad school, I had this class called Aspects of a Writer. Our final for the class was we had to, and it was a pretty simple, I think, task. We had to get a Submittable account. And Submittable is a platform through which you submit poetry or fiction or nonfiction, anything to magazines. And it's really streamlined so that you can do it without a whole lot of hard work. It's quite easy to submit things through them. And one of the things that our professor, Dr. Anna Leahy, stressed was that you need to, if you want, you're in grad school, you want to be a writer, but if you want to be read, not just have written, but be read, you need to submit your work out to journals and look at the business aspect of it. And so one of our assignments was to create a submittable platform or a submittable profile and then make a submission.
Right.
And so I had already done that. I already sent a few things off, gotten all rejections. I call them declines, but they were rejections.
Oh, I like that. Declines. That sounds so much more gentle.
Jason, I don't need to tell you this, but there are some really, really famous writers that literally papered their walls with rejection slips just to remind them that they were on the right path to success. And also, I think when you get a rejection slip or a notice, it isn't really always valid. It's just because it didn't quite fit what that particular editor was looking for. Doesn't mean it was poorly written. It just means it wasn't right for them. And I think sometimes writers, they take it personally. They take it personally. They don't quite understand that.
You can't.
Well, yeah, you can't take it personally. That's definitely the kind of thing that will sort of torpedo any motivation you have to do it right.
What was exciting for both Angie and I, we had the opportunity to read several things that you've written, and you're very good, by the way.
Yes.
But it also, you're a very versatile writer. You're just not a one-note writer, to use a musical term there. But you create poetry. You've even done journalism. But I'd like to know from you, Jason, what topic gives you the most pleasure when you write about, or what it is that you write about that gives you the most pleasure?
Does that
sound better?
Yeah, I guess people and relationships. Writing tends to focus on sort of the human experience. I mean, that sounds cliche, but what makes us tick. I read a lot about families. And family. The novel I'm working on is about a family. The books I read tend to be about that. I think maybe if I hadn't studied English, been an English major, I might have looked at psychology. Because what makes people tick is endlessly fascinating to me. The human animal. I mean, I have friends who write science fiction. I have friends who write fantasy and stuff like that. But for me, there's so much out there that we still don't know about the human animal. People are so fascinating, and that's really what I write about. And then you talked about, writing poetry and nonfiction and fiction, etc. My poetry tends to be largely about family, the family dynamic. My fiction, my nonfiction. I wrote an essay that's coming out, I think, in June about witnessing someone's death. I was with my dad and a friend. We were in a car, and my dad's friend was in front of us on a motorcycle, and a car hit him. And it was out in our neighborhood, like I said, unincorporated, so we're pretty far from the rest of society, and he was killed, and we had to stay with his body for about an hour before the ambulance came. And I wrote about that sort of in the context of what it means to see something like that when you're that young. And we were on our way down to San Diego for a Taekwondo tournament. And we did go to the tournament, and all three of us, my dad, my friend James, and I were all three in shock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I bet.
When the tournament came home, and driving home, we had to stop. The only way to get home was to drive through that same road where Dad's friend Glenn had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stopped and shined the headlights on the broken glass in the road. And that sort of brought it home to us that it wasn't, we weren't all imagining this thing. It really happened. And yeah, and that was, we came home, and it was that image stayed with me. Actually, it happened looking back, it was 85. So I still vividly remember the image of Glenn head over heels flying through the air up above the telephone poles and then back down. That's how high he went, and back down and landing on his back.
Well, Jason,
that really does leave an impression.
Definitely.
For sure.
But it does I think it does two things for a writer, because a writer is using their imagination, right? And then they create the whole image of what you saw, and then you converted that to words, and then you thought about it. That's what makes for great writers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to say?
I was just thinking that, when Jason's talking about these events, and they're so vivid in the way that you describe them, I think that as a writer, it's kind of interesting to see the thought process. And I never thought about it this way, but your brain is chronicling everything you see and experience.
Good word, chronicling. Yeah.
So for you, it may not come out exactly the same, but later on, I'm betting that some of the emotions that you write, don't you think that you'll express it somewhere along the line?
Absolutely. I think so. Luckily, going back to my grad school experience, you talked about how I've written poetry in other forms. The focus of my MFA was fiction, but thankfully we were encouraged to write in as many forms as we could. So, I was able to study poetry and creative nonfiction and screenwriting, and use that to sort of, I was able to explore things about my childhood and things that I'd seen, things like the essays.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about when your articles and writings appear in journals and magazines. Share with us what some of those are, and how did it personally impact you seeing your work published when you first started seeing your work published? How did that feel for you?
It was great. I mean, it's enormously, it's a wonderful experience having your work, seeing your work in print. It's funny because my wife actually tells me that I'm addicted to the acceptance letter that I get.
And the bylines.
And why not?
Yeah,
right?
Why not?
And why not?
well, it's funny because I scroll my email during breakfast, which I probably shouldn't do that. I should just focus on my breakfast. But I tend to doom scroll. Maybe I look at not doom scroll as looking at the news, but I'll look and see what acceptances or what are the rejections typically.
Yeah.
I like I said, I submit quite a bit. I submit every single day, and so I get letters back from journals pretty much every day. Sometimes 3 and 5 of them. I've got like 3 today already. It's really something I enjoy. I've been trying to be a writer for more than 20 years now, and I started out writing about music, music reviews mainly. I did an internship with the Orange County Weekly for about 6 months, and that got me some experience writing about other things, writing about food. I did some food reviews and film, and also got paid, which was really nice.
That's nice.
But there is that thrill of being published, of seeing like you said the byline, seeing your name in print.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's two things that happen there too. Is when it's published, then it's an affirmation or it's proof that somebody else is going to read it too, especially if the publication has circulation. Then you know that
and you're like, oh yes,
it's got some longevity.
My stuff.
It's absolutely. I think that's probably more important than anything. Than is you know a lot of people are going to read it and people are going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. Well, it's funny because when I used to write for my college newspaper, I had a weekly column in the paper about music, and I used to complain to my wife that I felt like I had to pay people to read my work. Now that it's out there more, and I've written for a few bigger places, it's not quite the same as it was before. I owe a lot of that to grad school. Being in school, I had to, we had to generate quite a lot of material in a short period of time. I had one class that we wrote upward of 4 pieces a week, and we workshopped them in class. So everyone would read them, and the professor would talk about them. And I figured, why not submit these and see what happens? I mean, worst case scenario, they're going to say no. And I already know that, I knew then, I think that opinions are subjective, and what one person declines or turns down, another person will, enthusiastically accept. Don't want it.
I think that's part of the writing process. You really need the people that want to write or are writers. They shouldn't be bashful about sending it out, because you never know what's going to happen. But that in itself is a form of writing and expressing yourself as why a publication should consider the material that you prepare. So that's all part of the process of being a writer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so gratifying to even get one yes. I had written a piece for my class, a really short piece, because it would be called flash fiction. It was based on sort of a takeoff on a Russian fairy tale, because I'm a huge Russian lit fan. Mm-hmm. And I submitted this piece called The Clever Fool to a magazine, and they accepted it. And I was thrilled by that, but also even more gratified when my good friend Josh, who's in my cohort in school, went out and bought it. It was it was in a magazine called In Parentheses, and he bought a copy and showed it to me, and I'm so happy to see that. So that I think that sort of is what got me started on the journey of trying to get published as much as I could. But like I said, I mean, I do publish primarily short pieces, but I'm working on a novel.
I was going to ask you a question along those lines. We've interviewed other writers on the Thought Row podcast, and we discuss the book that they have written.
Or novel.
Or their novel, yeah. But you seem to focus primarily on article writing. But it's my understanding that you do have a book in the works. Is that correct?
Yeah. The shorter forms are kind of preparing me for the longer piece. And the longer piece was actually was once my MFA thesis. I wrote it in 3 months, the first draft, of course. I had a really great committee and a thesis committee, and they gave me, I think, more feedback than I probably deserved. Mm-hmm. They spent a lot of time with me, and I guess something like 70 pages of notes on this little 40,000 word novel that really felt like a novella at the time. But they said there's a novel in there. You just need to develop it. And that's what I've been doing. And right now I'm on the 4th draft. The last round of revisions, I'm going to leave it alone after this and start looking for a small publishing house or university press, or maybe even an agent. I'm not sure at this point, but it's I'm definitely going to publish it.
Well, the right person is going to show up at the right time. So
they always do.
They always do.
They always do.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
Well, I was thinking back to what Jason was talking about with the traumatic event that you lived through. How has that impacted your writing?
Well, it's odd because I'm still as much of a music fanatic as I ever was, but I think it's impacted my writing because it's given me, I had that lived experience, I guess.
Right.
They call it. I have things upon which to draw, and I don't. By saying that, I don't mean negative things necessarily or traumatic things. I don't want to be the writer that only writes about his injury or only writes about a traumatic event that is dominating my existence. I want to write about beauty and love and the things that we as humans take for granted. I wrote an essay last year about rescuing a baby crow in downtown Seattle. It's one of the greatest things I think that's ever happened to me was holding this baby crow in my hands and putting it back in a tree. It had fallen out of a tree and into the back of a truck downtown Seattle. And that was just a beautiful experience for me. But I think my injury has informed my writing because it has helped me maybe not take things for granted the way I might have or probably did when I was younger.
Yeah, I could see that it's kind of like a wake-up call. And I've heard people say that when they go through some very traumatic times or trying times, it's like all of a sudden you have a new appreciation for some of the gentler times in your life that you experience.
Yeah, they become more meaningful and also you have a tendency to live more day to day instead of trying to think about how you're going to be 10 years from now.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Both Angie and I write stories, and we love to say stories are what make us all uniquely human.
Yeah.
What do you think the value is for both the writer and the reader when it comes to stories?
Well, I think writing and sharing our stories with each other connects us all. It helps us to sort of see our shared humanity. And
I like that. Shared humanity.
There's a Chinese proverb. Yeah, there's a Chinese proverb that says that a book is like a garden carried in your pocket. And I really like that proverb. It shows me that a book opens the world to us. And something that we gain from reading and writing, especially from reading, is reading teaches us empathy. Mm-hmm. It allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of other people in the story. We can walk in those shoes and see the world through their eyes. And that's something you don't get from film. You don't get that from Facebook or YouTube.
No, because you have to use your imagination.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I love books that have been made into films. I tend to prefer the book version because a film to me is like a really passive, watered down version of what you've just read. I mean, I think of a book like, and I don't know if it's made into a film, but there's a great book called Half of the Yellow Sun, which is about the Nigerian Civil War and the Biafran War and all and the conflict and all that. And I look at how rich the storyline is, how rich the narrative is, and I whenever I see a film based on a book I've read, I avoid them now, but I tend to go, wow, what about this? What about that? Mm-hmm. There's all these things that are really, I mean, it's not their fault. They're just, you can't, if you were trying to make a film exactly like a book, it would be a 300-hour film.
Yeah, it would be long.
Yeah, but that's what I get out of reading, and that's what I get out of writing as well. Is this sharing of our humanity, and I think it's incredibly valuable. I think empathy is something that we really need to, especially now, show for one another and try to learn it. If we don't really, if we haven't, unfortunately, if some haven't, if we haven't learned empathy, we need to. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly important.
Yeah. Now more than ever.
Profound words, definitely. Yeah. Jason, we know you're very creative.
For sure.
For sure. What has been your driving force, and what would you tell others that want to follow their creative dreams?
My driving force has really just been the act of creating something, the act of creation in the simplest form, even. An example, during the pandemic, I started writing poetry. I'd never written any poetry before. But the pandemic sort of forced me to slow down and actually just stop what I was doing. I was in classes. I was in the middle of my second semester at Chapman when it happened. And I was then confined to our little apartment. My wife was at one end working from home, and I was at the other end studying and writing. And I'd write all day, and suddenly I started writing poetry. We'd moved back to California so I could go to grad school, and we're trapped in this apartment literally a mile away from the university. And I was frustrated, and poetry became my therapy. It was very therapeutic for me because, my poetry is always about other people in general. It helped me to focus more on the fiction I was writing, and they in turn informed one another. But if I were to tell someone else, I think you have to follow your passion. And if your passion is telling stories, I think for me, that's my stories could maybe, because they help me see the world a little differently, they could maybe help others too. And the best stories I've ever read, Toni Morrison, Paul Auster, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, writers like that reading a story of theirs helps me see my own life in a new perspective.
We're just looking at our time, and you're so interesting, and
we want to hear all that you have to say. Unfortunately,
we have
we're
more
running
questions
out of
I want
time.
to ask you, but I think we're going to jump ahead a little bit.
Pursuing any type of career, especially the one that depends upon self-motivation and creative development, how do you handle it when the creative muse doesn't seem to be anywhere around?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, you mean writer's block, essentially?
Yeah, writer's block or whatever you want to call it. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, talking about the muse and maybe when the muse leaves you.
Yes.
Momentarily. I've talked to friends about writer's block. It is real. There are people who will say that, I never have writer's block. And congratulations to them, but I certainly feel it at times. Part of it, I think, is, motivation, and part of it's a struggle to meet your own expectations. Expectations that you don't even know are there. You're not aware of them. But they're just waiting for you to sit down and ask you quietly what you're working on, and does this live up to your expectations of it?
Yeah, for sure. I want to get this other question in because everybody wants to know the answer to this question. Yeah. Writers all seem to have a place where they like to write most. Where do you like to write best, Jason?
Two places. The best place is at home in dead silence late at night, but I can't always write late at night because I work. So I also love writing, and this is the complete opposite of that. I love writing in public in something like a coffee shop. There's a great tea shop here in Seattle that I go to, and I'll just go in and sit. And when I do that, I don't bring a laptop. I bring a notepad and just write by hand, which is how I started. So I like to have both those two mediums within which to write. So two ways.
Perfect.
That's perfect. And then now we're going to ask you the question we ask everyone on our show, and that is, if you could sit on a park bench and chat with anyone from the past, who would it be?
It would be David Bowie or Toni Morrison, and neither from my past necessarily, because they I saw David Bowie perform when I was 12.
Yeah,
in San Bernardino at this giant music festival, and I started reading Toni Morrison about 15 years ago or so, maybe 20 years ago. It was in when I first gone back to community college the first time. I went twice. The first time didn't work out, and I ended up going back, but I couldn't pass math. But that's a whole nother thing. Anyway, sadly, neither are with us anymore.
Right.
We've lost them both, but I would love to have just sat and talked with them and about music and books and gotten a glimpse of how they see the world and how the world shaped their work.
Yeah.
They would be fascinating. I agree on that.
Well, I hate to do this, but Jason, thank you for sharing your personal journey and kind of the process of you becoming a successful writer. I know our listeners are going to really appreciate that. But also, I think Angie and I are really, I think the way you express yourself and your candidness about your life story, it's very meaningful. And I think a lot of people are really going to really appreciate what you had to say.
Yes. Thank you, Jason, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I really had a great time talking to you both.
Oh, I'm so glad because we really enjoyed speaking with you today. And now comes the time I let everyone know if you'd like to know more about Jason Thornberry. We will have links for him under the show guest tab on ThoughtRowPodcast.com so everyone can learn more about him. And please connect with him on social media and definitely check out his website.
Yeah, definitely. And you're going to love reading his writings. And there's going to be plenty more writing coming out of Jason. I'm sure of that.
That is true.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Also, if you're enjoying our podcast, both Rod and I would really appreciate you buying us a cup of coffee. Just go to thoughtrow.com, scroll down a bit, and you can find that link right on our website on the homepage.
It's really easy to do, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And all the money we receive goes to our production costs.
Yep.
And primarily because we want to keep our show commercial free and we want to continue to bring you the best quality content with great guests.
That's right. Thank you for listening to Thought Row Podcast.
I'm really glad you tuned in today. We hope you enjoyed the thoughts and ideas we shared with you.
We post a new podcast every week, so remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. So it's bye for now from my husband Rod and I, wishing everyone